Okay. So the next thing to talk about, I think I pretty well covered everything I had on my list about how to approach understanding the prophets in general. So now I'm going to talk about Joel in particular. Before we get into the reading the book of Joel, I'm going to talk about Joel in particular. And in particular, asking the question of why we're reading Joel now. Let me go ahead and get my list out here so I don't forget any of this. Okay, we're going to be reading, I put Joel in this spot on my read. Remember, and where we are in the narrative, we are in the days of the reign of King Joash, who took the throne at age 7. He was ruled by, basically dominated by the priest Jehoiada, as long as Jehoiada was alive. He takes the throne after Athaliah, the usurper, daughter of Ahab, is overthrown. She murders the royal family of Judah, takes the throne of Judah for 6 years, except for one child who was an infant at the time of her coup. And then he is brought out to the fore by Jehoiada the priest, who hid him in the temple. When at age 7, and becomes a boy king at age 7. And this seems to be a good spot to fit the context of Joel. Joel does not refer to a king at all. He doesn't refer to a king at all. So he's either coming along before the kings, which is basically impossible. He wouldn't be that early. Or he's coming along after the kings, because Israel doesn't have a king. When Israel comes back from captivity in the 530s BC, they don't have a king, and they never have a king again. So it could be the lack of a reference to the king could be an indication that Joel is coming along pretty late. Some people do put Joel pretty late for that reason. Now, I'm going to put him early. I don't think he's before the kings, but I think he fits nicely in this period of time right now, in the days of Athaliah or the early days of Joash, when they're not really being ruled by a king. You have 6 years with Athaliah. You have a number of years where Joash is too young to make his own decisions and be king. So there is kind of a lack of a kingly leadership for a period of 15 or 20 years here, including Athaliah's reign, the early reign of Joash. So I think he fits in about 830 or so BC. There is no mention of Assyria and no mention of Babylon. Assyria is going to come along as the dominant enemy of Israel in the 700s BC, and Babylon is going to be the dominant enemy of Israel in the 600s and 500s BC. So he's either before that or he's after that. Again, that kind of puts him either before or after. He makes no mention of Assyria or Babylon. Doesn't even really refer to the exile of either Assyria or Babylon. So again, he's either before these things happened or after they were, long after they're done. I think it's impossible ultimately to say exactly when he came along. Okay, I need to be honest. We all need to be honest. There's not enough information given in Joel for us to be able to say exactly when he lived. I put him here because I think he fits nicely into this context. I think the circumstances that he's speaking of fit nicely in the 830s BC or whatever, according to the Old Testament narratives. I also think he gives us a good starting point to understand a key teaching of Scripture, especially in the prophets, of the day of the Lord. Okay, in the book of Joel, we're going to be reading about this day of the Lord, and it's a big, big concept that we need to understand. And I think Joel gives us a good starting point and a good example of how to understand the day of the Lord. So I like to start with this because it helps us understand all the prophets coming thereafter, which I think in turn is evidence that Joel might have been first. Joel seems to be quoted by later prophets. There are verses and phrases in Joel that other prophets seem to quote, or he's quoting them. Again, that's kind of before or after. Is he quoting them or are they quoting him? I think it's more likely that they're quoting from him than he's quoting from all of them. So I think, again, I tend to put him before Amos, for example, who comes along in the 700s BC. So I think that Joel's before these guys, and they're all kind of quoting from him in their sections. I think he gives us an example, an early teaching of the day of the Lord, which will inform a lot of our teachings, understanding the prophets after him. And he also references the Valley of Jehoshaphat. There is no specific location with this name in Israel, but he's talking, I think, about the incident where Jehoshaphat and his people were being threatened by an alliance of nations from Moab, Ammon, and Edom. And we read about this in 2 Chronicles 20, and God fought for those nations on their behalf, and they just went into the valley. They, the Judahites, just went into the valley and raided the plunder after everybody else was dead. After the armies turned each other and killed each other. That seems to be a fairly recent event. And if Joel is writing in the 830s BC, it would be. That would have only been a few years earlier. So I think that he's talking about something that is still, just like the plague, the locust plague, that he's talking about is something that they're in their collective consciousness because they just experienced it. I think he's referring to the Valley of Jehoshaphat because that's a shared cultural experience that the adults of his time would remember. It wouldn't have even been that long ago. So I put Joel in the 830s or so BC for all those reasons. It's impossible to be completely certain because he doesn't give us a time frame. He doesn't give us a king in whose time he was ministering. He doesn't refer to any specific events saying that this happened, or that we can date. Okay, so so Joel himself, the text of Joel itself, doesn't outright give us any clear examples or any clear evidence of when it was written. But I believe an 830s-ish BC context fits very well. And at the very least, I read it first because it has such an important teaching in the day of the Lord, which will help us understand this very, very, very important concept. And we can then use that properly to understand a lot of the prophets, all the prophets pretty much, that come after Joel. So I put Joel, even if he didn't write first, I put him first because he then helps us understand all the rest. So that's why we're reading Joel now.